All right, howdy. So we'll go ahead and finish up this lesson with a brief discussion of the behavior-driven development cycle. And to some extent, you might hear this process being called behavior-driven design because we are doing some design as we're thinking about what our application will look like. And then we go ahead and include, say, those features into our actual development process. Now, we talked about test-driven development, we talked about behavior-driven development, and the next, logical question might be, how do these two interact? And what we'll see here is test-driven development gets absorbed into the behavior-driven design cycle. So what is that? So the first kind of thing you're going to do here, and you might have a collection of these through user stories, is you're going to write a single user story, which is going to describe a feature or scenario that can occur within your application. And we'll see here that what we're going to do is take that user story and actually write a test case for it to test whether or not we've successfully implemented it. So we'd go ahead and execute those tests. And what we'd see the first time around is, because we haven't actually implemented this yet, is it would fail. The scenario has not been implemented satisfactorily, and we actually have to go about beginning that. So we'll begin decomposing this into its various parts, and we'll begin to apply the test-driven development process as we're implementing our code that is going to essentially allow this behavior or scenario to emerge. All of these kind of lower level implementation details will be captured, say, through our unit test, the interaction of them too, and eventually as we begin putting our pieces together, this scenario will emerge, or this behavior or feature, depending on what terminology you'd like to use. So you'll implement a step definition, which for this point will be probably some sort of method that you're looking to implement. You'll go ahead and write a failing spec, and you'll continue this process. You'll write code, refactor, continue. And then eventually what's going to happen is that particular step in this overall process is going to pass. And this could just be one facet within a sequence of steps required to implement this overarching behavior scenario or feature. So eventually that step is going to pass. And we'll go back up and we'll run our test case for this behavior scenario again. At this point, we're one step closer to actually implementing the behavior, allowing it to emerge as our program is executed, but we're not probably done yet. So we continue going through this process of implementing various steps that are required to have this scenario execute fully. And then eventually we will have successfully implemented this scenario feature or behavior, at which point that test will pass. And then we can begin focusing on the next behavior that we'd like to include. So here's an example of just a scenario that perhaps is written on a note card. It's, I don't know, you've captured it on a napkin. Who knows where it's written, but this is one of the scenarios that you'd like to incorporate into your application. Now, where this is drawn from is I was trying to come up with inadequate scenario that might be of interest to you in the sense that you've kind of seen it before. So I drew this from last week's TRA, the week 1 TRA, which Nathan had wrote, which focuses on this idea of creating some structs, creating students, adding these or associating students with the department, tracking their courses. There's some file parsing, etc. Well, maybe we're putting all these pieces together, and one of the things that we want to do in whatever applications being created for the registrar is to add a new student to an existing course. I know I've deviated from the user stories that we've talked about a little bit. I didn't say, as an administrator, I'd like to add a new student to a course, etc. The reason why I'm presenting it in this manner is we'll see that it will translate very nicely into the type of behavioral test that the Catch-2 framework allows you to write. So, scenario. I'm a user of the program. I'm an administrator maybe in the registrar's office. I need to add a new student to an existing course. Okay, so given an existing course and a new student, so I have the student, I've got the course, we set them up, whatever. When the student is going to be enrolled into my course, I'm going to expect that student to actually be enrolled into the course. And how I will assure that is that the student will be successfully reflected in that course's roster. Okay, so that's the scenario. We have kind of the state before, we see the action, and then we see the reaction, I guess you could say, of the application in that, okay, cool, we went to add the new student to the course, and boom, they're reflected in the course roster. That's the happy path. We're all good. And obviously there would be sad paths, like what do we do if the student already exists, etc. You can think about where we could have issues and where things could go wrong. But here's derived from this, here's actual Catch 2 code, which can be stylized to look like the type we would expect for a behavior level test. And obviously this would work in conjunction with the unit test that we're writing as well. So again, this is the part where we're checking to see whether or not the behavior has successfully emerged. The actual implementation details are captured in our unit test. So scenario, add a new student to an existing course. Given an existing course and new students. Notice that within that block, I set up the world state before that operation. I did a little bit of hand wavy here and I said course, gave it a non-descriptive name, but anywho, I'm assuming we're going through setting up that course. Okay, student, I just gave them a UIN because I don't know, that's seemed to kind of go along with the example I was going for. We left all the other student qualities out right now as relevant to our application so that we can focus on the craft of this. But you would want to adequately set up your student before executing this test. So now we hit the win condition. In this case, this block will be executed. So we've set up the world. Now we're attempting to add that student to the course. So when that student is enrolled to the course, we can see here we execute some sort of enroll function on the student object. Then what we expect to happen is the student is reflected in the course roster. That's going to execute this series of checks here, which we're simply, in this case, assuming we have some mechanism to compare two student objects, we're looking up the student by their UIN and storing that student into a student object, and then we're simply comparing the student to the student from the roster. And we would assume that they would be equal if that student was successfully enrolled into the class. Notice here how we're going about this is kind of my expectations for this context in terms of what I would expect for this scenario to look like in practice. So this isn't like a template that you're just going to take and drag and drop in, what you're expecting for your scenario necessarily, because what you might expect to happen could be very different from this. The template here is these scenario, given, when, then blocks. The actual checks you're making, it's going to be very dependent on the context of the scenario that you're looking to implement. So, just understand that, you're setting things up, you're attempting to do something or interact with the feature, and then you're seeing whether or not, if that scenario executed correctly, you're checking to ensure that you arrived at that successful state. And that's what was shown here. So again, this is a cycle and it does incorporate test-driven development into it. We come up with our list of scenarios, user stories, ways we'd like to interact with our program. We can go ahead and write out a behavioral test. Okay, once we get this implemented, we expect to see, this to happen under this scenario when we're interacting with it. Okay, well, now we have to implement it. Behavior-driven development, concerned with the behaviors, not the implementation. Test-driven development, we're down into the nitty-gritty of the actual implementation. And then we come up and we're always checking against that feature whether or not the emergent behavior was successfully implemented or not. And it's just this continuous cycle of going through. Once we've successfully implemented the scenario feature, you then move on to the next one. So hopefully this was informative. Again, I know I'm using scenario, feature in the same context here. So when I'm saying one, I'm meaning the other as well, just to kind of capture this all under one umbrella. So, alrighty.